which we couldn't see. This is all rusted through. Our issue has become a bit more clear now. So we've removed the old leaf spring and rear axle setup, as we do have a slight issue. Welcome back to KM Builds. If you're new to the channel, this is mine and Matt's 1986 Honda Acti, and right here is where we are planning to put a Honda Fireblade motorbike engine. We're also planning to put this on air suspension and sit it as low to the floor as possible. But for us to be able to achieve that, we've removed the old leaf spring and rear axle setup, and we are putting a Mark 1 MX-5 subframe which will bolt directly to our chassis rails. So in today's video, you will see us make a start of finally getting this rear subframe onto the truck. But first up, these bulky pieces here are going to cause us a bit too much problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to lob these off, get these pieces gone, and then reinforce it ready for the subframe to go back on. Also, you might have seen in a couple of videos, there's 2 patches of rust in these chassis rails that we're still yet to fix. But by removing these pieces on the bottom, hopefully we gain more access to that. So today we can finally finish the last of the rust on our truck. If you missed the video where we've got rid of the rest of the rust on the truck, there used to be a frame going across here. We've removed that, so make sure you go back and check that out before you go on to watch this video, as it will make more sense. But let's just crack on and get these pieces off. So as you would have seen, I've started to remove them pieces underneath. Basically, you've got the main chassis rail, and then there's thicker material which was, I imagine, reinforced for the bump stop for the leaf spring and the rear axle. But that will cause us some problems, but it's probably a good job we're taking it off, so let me show you. So I started to cut at the point where we're going to replace, but as you can see, underneath this panel here, which we couldn't see, this is all rusted through. It's all really rusty. I haven't finished removing the piece yet. As you can see, there's a section there which runs along, which is like a 2mm thick piece. This is all going to be removed. From the inside, you can see there's a lot more rust further up as well. So the plan is to basically cut up past that and just remove absolutely all the rust. What I may do as well is just remove this section here. I'll leave this patch in, as this is what the other previous owners did, and I don't want to really cut that out. But what I'm probably going to do is, rather than try and patch it up here, just cut it all the way along that seam there and carry the repair all the way up. So I won't bother too much showing you any more of that, but I'll just show you what it looks like when it's finished and all of the area that we're going to put new material in. So I've cut off more than I was hoping to, but there was a fair amount of rust here. So as you can see, I've just cut off the both sides. All of this section was fully rusted. It was rusted around the corners. It was rusted up towards here. So I've just cut a nice square. So the plan is now is to get a piece and match it up. It shouldn't be too difficult, as long as I tack weld there and join up there, and then I'm going to get something on the inside, tap the metal round to shape the same side. I'm hoping it's not too difficult, but it's quite hard to get the weld to look OEM, but we can hopefully sort a lot of it out at the end with filler. I'm not going to cut the other side yet, as I've cut a fair bit away. There's still absolutely loads of structure left, so it shouldn't shift in any way, but I'm just going to leave that there for now on the other side, replace this side, get it tacked in at least, and then I'll go and cut the other side off. But it's a good job we were doing this, because there was a lot of rust which we couldn't see, which we've now removed, which is a good thing. And hopefully, fingers crossed, everything goes okay. So I've tacked my piece to the chassis rails, and I've used a bar which I've also tack welded inside the chassis rails on the curved edges, and then heating up and hammering the panel round the bar to get the shape of the chassis rail. I've left a little bit excess on the material, as you can see there, which I've now trimmed down, and then I trimmed to size to get the exact shape of the piece that we've cut out. So after a little bit of work, as you can see, the piece up here is now in, but let me show you a bit closer up, as it does look a lot better than it did before. So at the minute it's only tack welded. This side was, I think the gas on the welder might be running a bit low, that's why it's not so good this side, but this side was a lot better tacking it together. But as you can see, that's pretty straight, it's pretty decent. Just fills in the empty spot. I know there's a spot here, but what I'm tempted to do is this groove only goes up to here, so once this is completed fully, I may cut this section out here just to make that flat as well. And just to show you on the inside, that piece is now all as one. And as I said, there's that groove I might get rid of later on, because there is a bit of rust up here as well, so I may get rid of that at the same time. But now that piece is in, it's a bit more solid, tack welded together, I'm going to cut off the other side. Again, a couple of hours work, so let's just crack on. I won't show you that bit because it's exactly the same as the other side. So I've tacked in the 2 pieces that I wanted to change. I have got to do one on the driver's side still, so let me show you. So as you can see, passenger side is in and the driver's is also in. I did end up cutting more of the passenger side because there was a dodgy repair that was like by here that went all the way up to the top, so I just cut the whole lot out. And on the inside you can see I haven't had to go up to so far, and that side is tacked in. So now that the 2 chassis rails are pretty much ready, we can now start to mock up the rear subframe. So the rear subframe is basically going to mount along this section here and the same the other side, but as it stands we do have a little bit of an issue. So let me go on the whiteboard and I'll try and show you best I can our issue. But just to give you a bit of understanding, this is the subframe, and there's a kind of a square section, which is what I'll show on the diagram in a minute. So these are the 2 rails here. So this is our issue. So the red 2 lines here are our chassis rails. This is exaggerated a little bit, but you should get the idea. So the subframe at the minute does reach the 2 chassis rails and it does sit on the chassis rails. However, the bolt holes that we need in order to mount to the chassis rails don't quite reach, which are the bolt holes here. So there's one this end, one that end. These ones I'm not sure what they're used for entirely. So essentially the chassis rails actually sit here. So the subframe does take the weight of the chassis rails as the edge does sit on the subframe. But there's a couple of options we could have done with that. We could have made a load of brackets, could have somehow modified the chassis. There's a lot of other ways in which we could have done it, but we have come up with an idea and we think it's the most simple idea and also one of the most structurally sound. So I'm just going to cut 2 pieces of metal and I'll show you the plan. So we think that the best solution to make this fit is to essentially be able to move these holes and just widen them so that the bolts will bolt inside the chassis rails, and that's where this piece of 5mm thick steel comes into play. So what the idea is that we are going to basically put this 5mm piece of steel on here. We've still got to trim it to go around like this welded bit here, but essentially then the 5mm piece will be welded all here, all on the inside, all on the underside of there, and we will also weld. I need to remove this bit here because it's sat too high. We'll weld on the inside of these holes, flatten the areas off we want to add the bolt holes, because all we got to do then is drill a new bolt hole more towards the edge, but then we've got more material to hang over the edge and take more of the weight of the chassis rails. Bear with me, this will make more sense when it's all assembled and finished, but for now I'm going to crack on, clean all this up, primer it all, get this bit removed, and then tack weld it into place. I don't want to weld it up fully yet, just in case we decide to do something else, but so far this is the idea. So I now have my 2 pieces of steel notched out for the weld that's on the diff mount. What my plan is now is to tack on the big plates. So just to give you a bit of an idea, as you can see I've had a notch there, we will fill that hole in, but now from the underside, as you can see, there is a lot more excess, so now we can either flatten this piece here or just drill holes in the center piece here and mount this to the chassis. So the subframe is pretty much level on this table, so I've given it a coat of weld through primer both sides, give these another coat, and the plan now is to just tack weld these pieces on to the relevant sides. Really speaking, where these sit, if they're a mil or 2 out, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, as long as we have the center and then end up drilling the holes through there in the right places, we have got a bit of room for movement. But I am going to try and get them in the exact same place as possible. So as I said, let's just tack weld these on. We are tempted to get these welded by someone else, because obviously I'm fairly new to welding, and someone with a bit more experience might be able to weld these a bit better than I can. So for now, let's tack weld them on. So using spirit levels, rulers and anything I can to make sure that these pieces are level. I also removed any high spots on the actual subframe to make sure these metal pieces can lay as flat as possible on the top, and then just tack weld both sides. I did take some measurements and get them both in as good a position as possible, but they are looking pretty good. So as I said, I've only tack welded them for now, as if we for some reason need to cut it off and move it at all. Again, my welds are not perfect, but they are doing the job, and they will do for now, as we might get someone to weld them professionally. But as you can see, I've got the spirit level on. They're both level either side. It's pretty bang on, to be honest. So yeah, pretty happy. So that is it for the subframe for the time being. The next step in order to get this subframe in, we've got to level the bed of the truck now, level the subframe underneath and see the difference, as we do have a slight issue, but I'll show you on the whiteboard now. So just to show you our kind of minor issue is this section here is where I've just replaced the rust, as there was a big chunky section here, which this is where the center axle was, and there was kind of a bump stop here, so that's why I cut out and replaced. So this is the top of the bed, and this is the main chassis rail. But our issue is that the chassis rail towards the front of the truck comes relatively flat, but where the subframe needs to go, it starts to taper upwards, so the truck isn't actually level in terms of on the chassis rail. So when we come to put the subframe in level, we got a slight gap here, but we do have an idea for that, but that is our issue, where we've got to somehow level off the chassis rail or do something so it's leveled off. If it was tapered the other way, I think we could have got away with just mounting the subframe ever so slightly not level, because then when you're hitting a speed bump forward, the suspension travel would travel that way, as opposed to if we just mounted it straight to the chassis now, the suspension would travel that way, and then it's going to end up causing some damage. But our next major problem is getting this level, but as I said, we do have a solution, hopefully, so let's just see what happens. So I've leveled the bed of the truck. It's not perfect, but I will get it a bit better as we go along, because now I've got to, now that this is level, raise the subframe up so that the furthest forward part of the subframe is just about touching the chassis rail. And as I explained on the whiteboard, how the rear end of the chassis rails taper upwards, I want to then see how much of a difference we have compared to when the bed is level and the subframe is level. So I'll level it off now, get it to the right height roughly. Even if I leave it an inch short, at least I know then. If I take an inch off what's left the other side, I'll know how much I need to build up at the rear of the subframe. But for now, let's get this subframe propped up as well to the same height as the chassis. So I've leveled the truck and got the subframe up now to a similar level of that, the chassis rails, and our issue has become a bit more clear now. So now we have to come up with a solution. So let me show you the actual problem. So firstly, with regards to moving the subframe back, I've took a little measurement from here, and the engine is about 500 mil wide, and I believe it comes to about here. So with the diff coming out of the rear subframe ever so slightly, there's not a lot of room for a drive shaft. So what I have done at the minute so far is, there's the mark for the center of the wheel, and we've gone probably 2 inches further back, and it doesn't look like out of place. Obviously the only thing at the minute is the mud guards, so they would be cut off and we would do something with them. But our main issue is that, if you can see in there, the front of the subframe is actually touching, whereas the back of the subframe is quite away from the chassis rail. So we either have to add more to the back in a way of, I was tempted to possibly get a 2mm sheet of metal and make a template of the chassis rail and essentially lie the 2mm plate on here and then spot weld it onto there. Or the other option is to cut and remove some of the front where the front of the subframe touches to essentially create a notch in the front to allow the subframe to go up in. But I'm not really a fan of removing any more of this chassis rails, so I think I might try and come up with an idea of building up the back end so we can make a level platform for the subframe to mount up against. So after a couple of hours work, I have come up with some sort of solution, but this is where you can help us out. We're always saying you can help us out. If you don't think this is going to work, or there's something wrong with this, or if there's anything we can improve this, then make sure to drop a comment. We're always reading, and it's always ideal for you to let us know what you think. But let me show you the idea. So I've essentially created this box section out of 2mm thick plate. And the idea is this section here, which we added onto the subframe, this plate can sit exactly on there. So as you can see, that fits perfectly onto the subframe. And the idea is that when we lower the chassis onto the subframe, you can see on the front there that the front sits in nice and low and the back is sat up nice and high. It needs some fine adjustments, as you can see is a bit too tight in there, so we can trim that. But the idea is now that what I would essentially do is weld all across the top of there, all across the back. I would either plate this up to box it off, or I would carry the bit of a better shape on so it's a bit more angled. The same then would be on the front. Again, it needs a bit of fine adjustment, but I would weld up all the way across there and all the way across there. Some of you may be thinking then, but if we weld all that together, then how are we going to get this subframe off in the future for servicing and maintenance? But let me show you that. So I've now taped it into place, but the idea is that if I lift the truck back up, the piece that's added on there, that will remain onto the chassis as that will be welded all the way around. But then what would happen then is we essentially drill holes into here, however many, whether or not we do 1, 2, 3 or just 2 either side, and then we can simply bolt all the way through, and then we will add some sort of nut on the inside of the chassis rail. We'll reinforce this before we add a captive nut. The same on the front. We'll add a big 2mm plate on the inside of here, and we can bolt all the way through, which then means we can remove the whole rear subframe and it's not all welded together. We may even put the bolt on the inside of the rail and have the bolts poking down through the chassis, and then you add a nut onto the captive bolt. So I'm going to crack on and make the other side now. The other side was ever so slightly too narrow, so I can now see and do one on the other side. I might not redo that one, but if I have time I might remake it, but it does fit for now. But let's get the other one made. So I have finished off the other side now. Again, this side is exactly the same. It needs a bit of trimming and all that and finessing, but it will do the job for now, as we do have to do a fair bit yet. We have to still tidy up underneath the pieces. So underneath there you can see it still needs all sanding back, prepping, priming and all that before we even do anything with the new pieces, as we want to make sure that underneath them pieces is fully secure. We may add a hole in them pieces just so we can get access, put in things like wax oil and things like that, and to keep it tidy. The next big decision is deciding whether or not we put this subframe slightly further back than standard. But for now I'm just going to carry on with the stuff that needs doing. I'm going to grind off all them welds, check for any holes, weld up any more holes than I need to, and just generally tidy all that area up, ready for us to start actually mounting them pieces I've just made onto the chassis. But there's not a lot to show you other than what you've already seen, so I'll just time lapse it. But let's just crack on and get these pieces ready to go on. So that is it for today's video. We've got to spend a couple of days now and just see whether or not we're going to put this rear subframe slightly further back than the standard axle. So all we have to do is basically mount them pieces that we've made further back than we would do if we wanted the axle in the standard position. We're going to split this video into two parts as there's a lot to cover. We will start to work on the front of the truck soon, so make sure you go and subscribe to follow along and see when we start to make a move on the rest of the truck. But hopefully in the next K-Truck video we will have this rear subframe fully bolted on and ready to make a start on the suspension. We may not look at the suspension yet, but that will have to come further down the line. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, make sure you drop a like, maybe drop a comment with any feedback, and we will catch you in the next one.